Metroidvanias are absolutely everywhere these days. Some of them are absolutely brilliant, some are totally forgettable, and a lot of them kind of blur the lines together. After Hollow Knight Silksong set the standard after years in development now, everyone's kind of been chasing that same magic, sometimes successfully, but most times pretty painfully so. So when Focus Entertainment finally announced MIO Memories in Orbit, a brand new Metroidvania from a smaller studio, I was incredibly interested but very cautious. Big promises alongside a bold art direction and over 20 hours of content? That's a lot to live up to, especially for a publisher that doesn't have a game like this within their portfolio. Now, after spending nearly 30 hours with the game, the question is simple: is MIO a journey worth remembering, or just another echo of what we've already played? Well, my name is Fletcher, and this is Xbox Nation, and let's dive into my review of MIO Memories in Orbit and find out. I do have to start with letting you know that MIO tells its story in a way that feels almost instantly familiar to fans of the genre, and that means minimal exposition, environmental storytelling, and obviously deliberate ambiguity. You will play as MIO, a small but agile robot who then awakens aboard an enormous structure known as the Vessel. This is essentially an ancient technological ark that has been drifting through space for centuries, and its original purpose has been long forgotten. It was once maintained by these sort of AI caretakers called the Pearls, but since then the Vessel has now fallen into decay as they've basically disappeared. That means the machines have turned hostile, nature has reclaimed the steel corridors, and entire systems are shutting down. Your ultimate objective is to restore the Vessel by reviving key components named after parts of the human body, that being the spine, the eye, the hand, and a couple more, as you explore deeper fragments of the Vessel's past to begin to surface, alongside unsettling hints about MIO's own origins. The story is intentionally vague for most of this game, and like many of my reviews, I will never spoil anything here, because the joy of these games is just discovering it all yourself. It does mean that lore is discovered through scattered logs and visual storytelling rather than long dialogue sequences. There aren't too many characters in this game, and most conversations are pretty brief, often taking place at the central sort of spine hub or following the incredible boss encounters. At times, this obscurity can be a little bit confusing, and I can see many new players not really getting along with it. The narrative doesn't fully come together until much later in the game, but when it does, it tackles surprisingly heavy themes around memory, identity, and purpose. It's not the most emotionally impactful story that I've ever played, but it does fit the tone of the world pretty perfectly. It's very melancholic, lonely, and very reflective. From the moment you take control though, MIO feels absolutely fantastic to play. Movement is very fast, fluid, and responsive, and platforming has a real sense of momentum, and once the game really opens up, traversal becomes one of its greatest strengths. You will start with some basic abilities right out the gate though, that being a double jump and a standard combo, but movement tools are gradually introduced as the game goes on. These include the likes of grappling onto distant points using MIO's hair, spider-like wall clinging as well, alongside air mobility upgrades, and so many more. Importantly though, these abilities are unlocked at fixed moments you cannot miss, which keeps the pacing really tight and ensures the game never overwhelms you with its mechanics in that sort of 20 to 40 hour playtime. That said, platforming certainly isn't flawless. Later on in the game, precision can occasionally feel a little bit off, particularly near spikes in the difficulty. I had moments where MIO didn't appear to be close to any sort of obstacle, but then take damage and die anyway. It doesn't happen that often, but in a platform heavy section, it can certainly be frustrating, especially as you need to complete these to progress the story. Still, overall, the movement is an ultimate joy. When everything clicks and you're chaining abilities together, you genuinely feel unstoppable, and I think that's where I enjoyed most of my time within this one. Progression within MIO though also revolves around a resource called Nacra, and you ultimately collect this from enemies and the environment. Like any Metroidvanias, Nacra is dropped upon death unless you store it at a crystallization machine that's found throughout this vessel. Nacra is then spent on different upgrades and modifications, and this system is one of the game's kind of standout features, which I really wasn't expecting. You're going to be limited by different mod slots, meaning you can't equip everything at once. It forces you to make meaningful choices and experiment with different builds just based on the different modification points that each one takes up. Some mods will offer straightforward boosts, which can be for like sort of lower points, sort of 5 to 10 maybe, while others will introduce some clever trade-offs, which means that potentially you cannot heal, but it means that you'll be able to see more of the map, etc, etc. It's sort of a genuine risk and reward system, which I never really came to expect with this sort of game, and I really respect the developers for not letting players become absurdly overpowered, especially towards the latter part of the game. Talking about not becoming overpowered, let's talk about the combat. In MIO Memories in Orbit is very fast, fluid, and movement driven, like the platforming segments. You're very much encouraged to stay mobile at every single moment, and you'll be dodging, repositioning, and just using the environment rather than simply standing your ground and trading hits. MIO's basic combo feels very responsive, and as you unlock new abilities, combat gradually becomes more expressive. Tools like the aerial mobility, as I mentioned, alongside grappling and movement-based attacks, really allow you to control space rather than just dealing damage, and once you start chaining these abilities together, fights flow far better and feel way more dynamic, and I won't lie, they look pretty beautiful on the screen. One area though of the combat which really stood out for me were the boss fights, and this is where MIO truly comes alive. These encounters are consistently well designed and feel like genuine tests of everything you've learned up until that point. Bosses aren't just going to be damage sponges either, they really do demand your mastery of movement, timing and positioning, and I've died countless times to them, so they're definitely worth playing. Each boss has a distinct identity both visually and mechanically. Some focus heavily on arena control, where others will push vertical movement, and a few actively force you to rethink how you approach combat altogether, as they sort of introduce these elements where you need to glide throughout the environment, or even take on a boss where you have to actually just progress through a platforming section and even take damage from that. Even side bosses feel handcrafted rather than thrown in as filler, and those ones are truly unique and you should not miss them. What really impressed me is just how fair these fights feel. Deaths rarely feel cheap. Attack patterns are clearly communicated here and there, and every loss feels like a lesson rather than a punishment, as you now know how to sort of tackle them within the early movement stages. You're also really encouraged to experiment with your different upgrades and mods, as I mentioned, and some bosses genuinely feel easier or harder depending on your build choices. If I do have one criticism, it's the pacing. Boss encounters are sometimes spaced a little bit too far apart, especially during longer exploration stretches. When they do appear, they're constantly memorable though, and they're easily one of the strongest aspects of the overall game. Briefly touching on it though, MIO is surprisingly welcoming to newcomers. If you're new to the genre, there are several assist options that can be toggled on. These can include the likes of health regeneration while standing still, passive enemies unless they're attacked, and also bosses that are weakened slightly after repeated deaths. These assists don't really trivialize the game overall, but make it far more approachable for newcomers, which is great to see, especially in a genre that can often feel pretty over-intimidating within certain areas. Now, for me, the world of MIO is genuinely breathtaking, and I think this is what drew me to the overall experience in the first place, and why I reached out to Focus for a review key. The cel-shaded art style gives everything a sort of hand-drawn etched quality that feels both delicate and imposing at the very same time, and every single biome here looks and feels distinct, not just visually, but mechanically as well. You'll often move through crumbling city ruins that have been overtaken by vegetation, or you'll suddenly have vibrant overgrown gardens, frozen zones where slippery terrain affects your movement, and even dark mechanical corridors that are humming with hostility. These environments don't just exist to look good, they actively influence how you move and play, and they really took my breath away at times. The vessel itself feels like a living organism. It has history, logic, and structure. Ecosystems will overlap as machinery intertwines with nature, and areas feel purposely connected rather than randomly stitched together. And I tell you what, there's some mind-blowing elements which do happen towards the latter part of the game, but I don't want to spoil more because it really is interesting. Exploration is incredibly rewarding as always though. There's so many different hidden passageways, secret upgrades, and just optional challenges that are scattered everywhere. However, as much as I love the overall world, the art direction, and everything else the devs have really made here, navigation can be a little bit frustrating from time to time. While the map is always available to you as a click of a button, it is a welcome improvement from what the original game was during the demo. However, progression paths aren't always clearly communicated here and there. The visual clutter on screen can certainly hide crucial traversal tools, and certain mechanics do blend too seamlessly into the environment. There was one instance where I spent nearly 2 hours being stuck, only to discover a jump pad hidden in some dense foliage. Moments like this can certainly be immersion breaking and may frustrate new players who aren't really comfortable with that Metroidvania logic, and with it being on Xbox Game Pass and having so many newcomers being entered into this genre, I can certainly see it being a contentious point. That said though, when the exploration really works, and most of the time it really does, it's deeply satisfying. Mastering all of its traversal mechanics, uncovering those hidden little secrets here and there, and just slowly untangling the vessel's deep layout is one of the game's biggest strengths overall. Despite a few frustrations though, MIO Memories in Orbit is an outstanding Metroidvania. The movement is very exhilarating, the world is absolutely gorgeous, the bosses are so memorable, and the overall experience is far more confident than I ever expected. Enemy variety and navigation issues do hold it back slightly though, alongside the odd platforming quirk, but none of those really overshadowed what the game really does right. For me, MIO earns a strong 8 out of 10. The amount of content on offer is utterly excellent, and the fact that it's going to be available on Game Pass makes it an easy recommendation to dive into, especially as you've got a sort of a 25-hour to 40-hour game here. If you're even remotely interested in Metroidvanias or want a strong entry point into this genre for the very first time, this is absolutely worth your time. Definitely stick with it though, be patient because it can get a little frustrating at times, but ultimately you'll be rewarded with one of the best Metroidvania experiences that we have available on the service. Are you going to be diving into it on Xbox Game Pass? I'll be keen to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to smash that like button as always if you enjoyed this review so it pushes it out in that YouTube algorithm, and do subscribe for more reviews like this on a daily basis. Whilst here though, make sure to check out the video on screen now, as I did cover the upcoming Xbox games for this week to see if any of them are worth your time and money.